Education is a global right that should not be held to the limitations of a dollar sign. This debate is ultimately not just about teaching science to a wider audience, but more importantly, about the preservation of human rights. Proposition is going to give three main arguments in this round. First, it might create better access to education. Second, it might create greater scientific innovation in the long run. And thirdly, on education disparities. First, settle. What do current piracy sites look like in the status quo? If the audience looks like the distribution of material that's usually paid, we bite the bullet that it's illegal, but know that the printed material that we support is educational. Of course, we're not willing to support the piracy of movies because it doesn't necessarily give a net benefit to people. Rather, it looks like scientific articles that gives people an educational benefit. This means that people like the poor have more access to things they couldn't access before because of systematic inequalities that they can't control. For example, we were born poor you're born into a system where you don't have the money to get information from the best resources and have to rely on sketchy third-person parties that are often inaccurate. This perpetuates education disparities because the rich can get tutors and access to education, but moreover, it's a fundamental violation of a human being because education is the most important thing to have a good living. The comparative op is that the very same people can access education means they have to rely on blue-collar jobs that don't pay well. The magnitude here isn't that just poor people get dumber, it's literally that they create a terrible society for the most marginalized communities, which is self-explanatory as to why their side is bad. Secondly, on some key preemptions. Two main preemptions in my speech. First, opposition is probably going to talk about the legality of these websites. The response here is that we agree that the sites that we support are highly illegal, but illegal does not necessarily mean right. We are willing to accept that piracy itself is a bad thing, but we say that but insofar as we're able to provide the most marginalized communities basic education, that itself is a benefit that escapes all legality. Secondly, even when the people don't pay the cost and resources these websites pirate, we just hope that this isn't necessarily a bad thing because education itself shouldn't have a cost anyways. Secondly, all will also probably talk about writer protection, but again, the writers of education journalists write them for a hobby, like as they probably realize scientists. But even if you don't buy this, again, the fact that they restrict education itself is a massive violation. For example, just because you lose your fundamental rights when you're in jail does not overshadow the fact that you committed a crime, which is what restricted education is in the eyes of affirmative. Also, the main and most important thing in this debate is ensuring the right to education as it should be a fundamental human right, but you're already paid, and something that writer rights or legality cannot grasp. This nicely flows into my first argument on the access of education. The premise of this argument is that we expose a wider audience to basic and fundamental education. The, the mechanization for this argument is twofold. Firstly, we think that education should be accessible to all people at the end of the day. The author's right to earn money and all of that should be important as well, but we think that we shouldn't let the author be selfish and instead think for the common good to help the entire society become fairly educated. B, note that we can't have small children who cannot properly get educated because all important articles are being priced just because authors who already have their own rights anyways are not being given their rights. The poor children who have been taken away from too many of their rights should not be denied yet another universal right of education. Authors in a better situation than these children and end up being benefited by policy anyway. We then tell you that in the status quo, most of these poor people are born into systematic inequality, but moreover cannot access education, which just goes to show how much help we should give these poor people. On our second argument, innovation. The premise of this argument is that when we offer this material to a larger audience, we boost scientific innovation because there are more people having access to this material itself, meaning that more people can learn about science. And we say that when we have a wider audience, a wider demographic attracted to science, there's more people willing to innovate because you have more like innovation being attracted into the field of science, that means we just create more innovation in the long run, which is what Chloe is going to stand on. The mechanism, we say, then why do you have to remember at the end of the speech? Regardless of the practical side of our side, we literally give children who only dream of such an education a chance to learn and a chance to enrich their understanding of their world. Propose.
Ladies and gentlemen, and honorable judges, respective speakers of the House, I'd like you to imagine a situation where you spent years studying and undergoing laborious experiments and finally wrote a journal about, let's say, the origin of the universe. You consider this as a tremendous achievement, which it is, and decide to sell this journal to others, as you decide that you'll need monetary rewards for your hard work. But one day you find that your journal was published on an academic piracy website and that the general public was now able to view the result of your labor without any fees. How would you feel? Insulted? Angry? To prevent these situations from happening, our side, the opposition, regrets the rise of academic piracy sites. Before my main speech, I'd like to reply to some arguments made by the government. So the Prime Minister claimed that these academic piracy is illegal, but it still has good intentions and should be supported. The first contention was about the rights to education, and they said that they were saying that authors will have to sacrifice their rights for the greater good of the poor people's education. This is very dangerous. This thoughts can lead to totalitarianism, and the opposition side, our side, considers this as a very dangerous contention, and therefore this does not stand. Their second contention was about having restrictions to education is a violation of rights. This is true, but just because restrictions of education, free education is a violation of rights, does not mean that those authors should be violated their rights. In this case, the ideal situation would be the government using tax money, buying those scientific journals from the authors and revealing it to the general public. However, the government does not have enough tax money for this, and therefore the government can only support basic educations such as elementary or middle school education. That's why we have elementary and middle school educations for
Why?
free. No, thank you, sir. And the last contention made by the Prime Minister was simply saying that authors have money, so their rights are less important. So they said that authors have more money, so their rights are less important than of those of the poor people. Now, justice is receiving fair rewards or consequences for your actions. So I believe that the last contention made by the Prime Minister was what it was about having an unjust and a non-just society. Now, I'd like to move on to my main speech now. First, academic piracy websites steal the author's profit. Now, most journal authors intend to receive profit for selling their journals. Academic piracy websites sell these journals for free and thus pay no royalty. Other than this action being immoral, as the DLO will explain later, this action causes the public to be attracted to the academic piracy sites, since they can access journals and information without any fees. This will cause the author to lose revenue as customers abandon them and go for the pirating sites. This goes against the author's intentions and will own righteous rights that they own over their own creation. Second, academic piracy causes our authors to be disincentivized to create journals. I can simplify this entire contention into one question. Why work hard and write a journal if you get no rewards for it? If authors expect to get no rewards due to the piracy sites, then they won't spend their time
Why,
writing
sir?
journals. No, thank you, sir. Actually, out of order. Surely, if one scientist is starving and is deprived of money, then he tried writing one, but this would seriously decrease the number of high-quality journals being written. Since high-quality journals require hard work and expensive technology used experiments to write, so the number will significantly decrease due to decreased profit. This will significantly deteriorate advancements in knowledge and progress, as drastically less people will be incentivized to study and write high-quality journals. Thus, supporting academic piracy sites will slow down progress. And I'd like you to know that this is not the worst-case scenario.
Up here is saying that since poor beggars on the street aren't working, they deserve no money and should starve to death. Unfortunately, this makes our world corrupt, as social welfare systems don't exist because the social good is not thought of, and therefore they live in a dystopian society. We think that companies who create this work have their own copyright needs to be upheld in this debate. But however, we think that copyright issues should not be tackled with adding price tags to the products of certain things. Sure, like we said, not allowing free materials and therefore not having the impacts of academic piracy may impact the customers because they don't get fair access to education, which we tell you is terrible, but we also think this impacts the company and their overall development. So not only will citizens be impacted, the company will also be hugely disadvantaged. Note that that attention is a very important thing in this debate for any article to gain momentum and political attraction and societal attraction in the first place. We think that by diversifying the amount of people that can view a particular scientific article, not only does this create an equal playing field for the consumers, but it also makes more people recommend the article so that more people can read it, which leads to more attention and therefore benefits the author and the company anyway. But we also think that since the society cannot see the article when they haven't purchased it, and since they cannot get accurate views because no one can buy the article and review it, because pricey articles will end up just losing to consumer demand, as online researchers will just give up without paying for the article and just try to find another one online because online research is so accessible these days. We think that academic piracy is only a tool to get more readers interested in the article and therefore benefits the company or the author itself, and therefore we have both the stakeholders' rights on our side, right? Moving on to some other rebuttals, they talk about how authors work hard in their speeches, but we think that they still get recognition in our world. And if the authors don't write good articles and they technically fail, this is a very unstrategic move for authors in the long run, because even if they don't get credit for their work, if they completely give up on their job, this is a bad social recognition for them. But writing good articles also gives them credit anyway. This is also not important compared to protecting the basic fundamental human rights of people that we have on our side. Moving on to our add-ons then. We tell you in our first argument that education is a fundamental right that should be given to all citizens for the prosperity of the entire country as a whole. We think that donations and social welfare in society already exist because we're trying to give the rights to underprivileged citizens at the expense of more privileged ones. We give you a trade-off that the rights of these underprivileged citizens are much more important than already fortunate authors, so we win in magnitude at the long run. Then we talk about innovation in our second argument. We say that we create more innovation in the long run because when you get more exposure to the field of science and education itself, it means you eventually get more people interested in science as a whole. Then why does this lead to more innovation? We tell you that we have more people that like science, and it means that you have far more people who are willing to contribute to the field at the long run once they become more successful at that field. Because we have more contribution, ultimately and intuitively, we have more innovation in the long run as more people create more products, creating a more diverse and successful society. Moving on to extension then, which is about how educational disparities will occur in opposition's world. The premise of this is that when adding price tags to certain educational things, opposition deliberately creates something to spend more money on for poorer schools with less resources. Mechanism for this is that we think that when rich people are given these articles that are priced, then they wouldn't have problems buying it because they're simply rich. The amount of economic burden wouldn't be that high anyway, and if they simply want to access the information, then they can simply buy it, no problem. However, we think that instead, the poor will actually suffer from this lack of educational abilities in the long run. If more and more posts have price tags added onto it in the future, then that means that there are less opportunities for them to have the same access to information as the rich. We think that education is a necessary thing you need for survival, as explained in our first argument, but we also think that if the rich only gets granted this amount of resources, then the poor will obviously not get this privilege. This then, in turn, creates only more further economic disparities between the two, limiting upward mobility to a huge extent, and thus making it very impossible for the poor to become as smart as the rich anyway, because they are already limited to so many resources. We concede to the fact that the poor people already have limited resources in the first place, which then mitigates the impact for the argument. But we also think that because the poor is in this much of a disparity anyway, we should be helping them, not plunging them downwards into a more unfortunate situation where even online articles cannot be read from them. Proud to propose.
Honorable Judge, the government side is constantly trying to argue how education is a global right, and the opposition is trying to argue. Government is trying to argue that it's okay to violate these rights of the writers. So of the writers, so that poor people can be educated and poor people can have more access and chance. So in my speech today, I'll do three things. Firstly, I'll rebut the points made by PM and DPM. Secondly, I'll rebuild the LO's arguments. And thirdly, I'll move on to our team's third and final argument, which is this is immoral. So the PM's first argument was about how education is a global right, and even though it's illegal, we should support it because it's educational, unlike piracy movies. Our side believes that even if it's educational, we believe that firstly it's illegal, so we believe it's wrong, and secondly, even though it's educational, we have to weigh this debate and see which is more important: the rights of the poor people or rights of the the authors. Well, this is where what the LO said comes in. The LO already mentioned that poor people already get funded in different ways. For example, the government funds education at a young age, and some people can get scholarships, and there's many education programs that the government put forward. So this point does not stand. He also said restricting education is a violation. However, they're not restricting education because think about this, if people were just being able to access these journals for free, then that means that less people would make journals because like they wouldn't be able to earn any profit, like the LO has previously mentioned continuously. And that means that there would be even less education. So that means both the rich and the poor would not be able to access education. So that means if you weigh it out, then their side has more losses than our side. So therefore our side takes this debate home. Next, the DPM made an extension. The DPM made an extension about it's like the rich poor gap will increase. However, we believe that, as I already mentioned, like the rich poor gap is already it can increase even more if like less journals are published. Like so like in their side, so this does not stand. And the LO also argued like if you write a journal and then if you use a pirate on an academic piracy site, then you don't earn money. And this is obviously true. And the PM tried to say that like their rights are good. However, the authors also have rights. Like authors are also people who work really, really hard. They spend so much time and money conducting these studies, and then all of a sudden, these are just like online. All right, so this is how our side is right. So the reason these sites such as Sci-Hub was founded because they shared journals without fees, and this attracted many people because they wanted to access these journals. However, we believe that sharing these journals will ultimately create less incentive for people to write research papers because people are ultimately going to use their work, like the Elo said. Also, paying zero royalty, like for using their thing, is just immoral. People who use these texts don't even like these scientific long texts don't even get consent from the author to read them. Furthermore, this can increase plagiarism. That as many students could use these in their own research papers. Thank you for listening, and I am very proud to propose this motion.
Honorable adjudicator, on the proposition side, we value the merit and elaboration that can be achieved when the impoverished are exposed to the information that can actually innovate their pathway to success. I believe the opposition side is totally misunderstanding the whole contention that is prepared by a substantive case. They mention a varied response of how the legality of the matter is insufficient in proving our case, but I would like to make it crystal clear as to how their analysis is a total misinterpretation and not nuanced enough to actually combat our case. I would now like to elaborate on to the opposition's first constructive clash point regarding the principle of education. Why is the principle of free education still applicable when websites still pirate these articles of forms and pirate these forms of literature, even though it might be illegal in opposition's stance? Opposition side responds to our case by mentioning the legality of the matter. But I would like to mention once again, this isn't nuanced enough to combat our case, and I'd like to mention this more later on. But let's make it crystal clear as to how their case is not justified. Firstly, on our side, we associate the access of education to be, put simply, a fundamental human right. This is because of two main faults. A, education ensures that a normal functioning person is to be exposed upon the nuance of what certain ideas are. Education is a method in which it develops the essence of how you view the functioning society and how development is critical. Also, education informs you as to how you should act in society to fit in, and therefore linked to the second fold. B, in the status quo, it is extremely difficult or nearly impossible to substantially associate and relocate your value to society when you don't possess a strong educational background or career methodology. This is especially for the sectors such as science and mathematics, as occupations for these sectors are profound beyond enormous amounts of rigorous training and practice and competition. So why is this relevant to our case? Panel, we explained to you how in the status quo, the impoverished are extremely marginalized to a factor in which they cannot associate themselves within society at all. They cannot find an occupation as they don't have such expertise that would have been provided by the education they have gotten. The systematic inequality continues in longevity, and once again, the poor are marginalized. Our side believes that the minimum threshold that can be provided to the impoverished is the free education that is provided on our side of the house, and the free education that is actually sophisticated enough to provide a pathway to success. Negative prone that is spotted in the opposition's case. On our side of the house, we believe that the basic governmental education provided to some populations of the poor is insufficient in actually preparing these individuals to become a professional in their respective field. The premise of this point is how the poor have no shot in actually reaching the level of success that society expects by just abiding by the governmental education system system, which is what opposition side is trying to prove in this debate. This point can be mechanized just by the fact that individuals get special tutors and lessons outside of school that attempt to enhance their nuanced understanding of the subject. What the proposition is saying in this case is how the poor don't have a chance to succeed unless they get outside help. Therefore, to a certain degree, these novels of science and math are essential for these poor people to achieve success. Now, opposition is putting a simple price tag on it for a normal poor family to purchase. But once again, these poor families don't have the financial aid to do such thing. There's no innovation for the poor to achieve success. Opposition side argues the legality of the matter is the most essential motive for the violation of such. This just proves how simple-minded their case is because firstly, as I mentioned before, it's not nuanced. But also, we have mentioned in our first speaker's speech that we accept the fact of the legality of the matter, but also we believe that the principle of education stands out most in this debate. I would now like to proclaim onto the opposition's second constructive clash regarding the more likely innovation of sectors. Why is the scientific sector more likely to innovate the premise when literature is more accessible to a varied range of people?
Science should be allowed or banned. We've shown how the illegal trade can lead to terrible outcomes. For instance, you can get captured if you trade some kind of scientific journal because it is illegal and unfair for the author who writes the books to earn profits. Now let's make it perfectly clear why the opposition should take this debate home. Previously, the speakers from the opposition argued that the journal authors intend to earn money through selling these, but academic piracy strips away the author's profit. It is because most journal authors intend to receive profit for selling their journals and academic piracy websites to sell journals for free, and thus pay no royalty. Our second argument was that if academic piracy is supported and it happens, a lot of the authors will be very mad to create journals. And if I explain this high quality journals, it requires hard work and expensive technology to write. So the number will significantly decrease due to decreased profits. Our last argument is that the reasons these sites, such as science hubs, were funded was because they shared journals without fees, and that the journal authors are the one who created the source for profit. But paying zero royalty is immoral. This is truly correct because sharing these journals will ultimately create less incentives for people to write research papers because people are ultimately going to still use their work. And actually, there have been evidence that the national government shares scientific articles without listening to the author's choice, such as a public book fair. This is a very unusual situation because as a representative of the country, they should actually ban piracy because it is disapproving. Piracy is a problem because I assume pirated articles are basically used as traps to steal personal data, bank information, or other sensitive information. It is a huge issue around the global community because hacking is one of the most essential problems that will lead to some kind of echo chamber and will probably cause some worse situations. However, the government side strongly disagreed with our arguments on 2 points, which were that our statements were unrealistic and unreasonable. They said education is very important to people, so free books aren't much of a deal when it comes to lack of education. But the biggest global issue. They also stated that we should support the rise of academic piracy states because education is fundamental and it should be accessible to everyone. By rebutting the Prime Minister's argument about the education is very important, the author's time is so supreme as the poor's lack of education. The author writes because they would like to get profit from their job, and if the consumer can't.
Ma'am.
No, thank you. But if the consumer can't buy it, it is so weird that the author has to give it for free. And the government's statement leads to genetic fallacy because they are just judging the poor based on their origins when they are actually getting more support than we think so. But Judge, now let me ask you a question. Should the author sacrifice his or her time just because of some poor people who want education? Obviously, no. These days, the global society always hands out their hand for the poor people if they would like to get education. They also receive basic education by the charity or volunteers who give out books or other educational materials to the poor. In response to the opposing team's unusual idea that free knowledge is a helpful tool when we are learning stuff but we don't have money, as I explained before, hacking by letting someone sign up their mail is an example. In addition, copywriting is an actual crime, and if you copy some kind of unknown text, the author will probably call the police for copywriting, and innocent people have to pay fees. Their supported idea was a slippery slope because the first event will not necessarily lead to such an extreme result as he described it. Therefore, our argument still stands as valid. We believe that the government's argument won't be taken against this motion because it is absurd to assume that the rise of academic piracy sites has no right to choose what they would like to download because it is literally illegal, and it is a huge disadvantage for both perspectives, which are the authors and the readers. So the government provided evidence for one situation, which is only the reader's itself points or point of view, or unlike the opposition who share diverse perspectives, such as the readers, the author, and the whole community too. So they also argued that the government also argued that people won't be able to view articles because they have no accessibility, and we are also totally worried about the government's concern of the scientific journals that are supposed to be free education.
Ladies and gentlemen, honorable judges, and respected speakers of the House, as a reply speaker of the opposition side, I'd like to explain why our side, the opposition, took this debate home. Now, I'd like to mention two major clashes in this debate. The first clash was about the author's rights versus the poor's rights. The proposition has claimed that the poor have the rights to education, and limitations to education are the violations and infringements of the basic rights. Indeed, the poor do have the rights to education, but that should not come at the expense of the author's rights. The authors have rights and intentions over their own creation, and forcing the authors to have no royalty in exchange for free articles to the poor are a violation of the author's rights. The government has the obligation to protect the citizens' rights, not the authors. Because the poor have rights to education, they are given elementary and middle school education, and that's what the government can do. That's all the government can do. The government does not have tax money to buy these scientific articles and give them out to the poor. And because of this, because the author's rights should not be gone at the expense of the poor's rights, we take this clash home. Now, the second clash was about the scientific progress. Our side has claimed how if scientists get no rewards, no monetary income for these experiments and studying, and for their articles, scientists will not have the incentives to research. Now, this is true. What scientist who would write these articles for the society's good if they have no progress? These people are not volunteers. Scientists do not volunteer for the society. There are people who are there to earn money, and thus this scientific progress will be lagged if these academic piracy sites are common. And because of this, we take both clashes home, and because of this, I am proud to oppose. Thank you.
Opposition ultimately loses this debate because even if we bite the bullet of every single shot Op gave us, they fail to tackle the most central idea of our case, which is giving people fundamental human rights. The only semi-rebuttal we get is that writer rights are more important, which is just a wishy-washy logic, right? Because rather than protecting the life of an actor that already makes a steady living, want to protect the billions of poor that want to learn science but can't because of systematic educational disparities. Also, we think that not allowing free material and therefore not having the impacts of academic piracy may impact the consumers, but then we think that this impacts the company and their overall development. Note that attention is a very important thing for any article to gain attention or traction in the first place. We think that by diversifying the amount of people that could get a particular article, not only does it create an equal playing field, but also makes it so that people are able to recommend this article and read it, which leads to more attention and therefore benefits the author anyway, because they have more exposure to a wider audience. This also tackles their point that authors won't work hard because they still will get recognition on our side. For example, when new innovations are made, your research might be credited, which is a huge benefit to the author anyway. And because they already told you we create more innovation, this also just helps the author in the long run. This then means the opposition did a terrible job and failed on giving us an effective and holistic response to the crux of our case, showing us a lack of engagement. This means our debate winning point still stands, and their only case on writers' rights are extremely elaborated and not fleshed out and developed. We tell you that not only do we win in magnitude to provide one of the most fundamental human rights, but moreover, we also have the moral high ground in this round to protect the most vulnerable and important stakeholders in this debate, which will be the sole basis of the verdict of this round. After all is said and all is done, billions of the poor are oppressed and hold their specific intellect and treated as inferiors in the status quo, and we thought that's unjust. So we're proud to win this debate.